Hello everybody, welcome to WonderMom's workshop. Today we are going to be making bread. Now this is probably the recipe that I get asked about the most. I make my bread in bulk for my 6 kids and I buy all of my ingredients in bulk as well. So today I wanted to show you guys just some of my tips and tricks and what I use to make this process a lot more efficient and easy to incorporate into my busy family. So I want to introduce you to the tools that I use first. My number one and favorite tool is my Bosch mixer. My Bosch mixer that keeps making marks on my shirt. So there's that. I love my Bosch. I love it because it holds so many cups of flour. If you are working with a KitchenAid, I suggest cutting it in half unless you have like an extra size KitchenAid, because otherwise it's not quite big enough. And that's one of the reasons why I do go with Bosch, and it lasts forever. I have a kneading hook. Usually any mixer, even if you have like an electric hand mixer, they have some sort of kneading hook attachment specifically for bread and bread products. I love my Bosch. I also use Pampered Chef measuring cups. I don't sell Pampered Chef, but I pretty much use everything that they sell. So there's a 4-cup measure, there's a 2-cup measure, there's a 1-cup measure that I don't have on me right now, and this little one is a 1/4 cup, and it marks off the tablespoons. So I use this for some of my smaller measure things. Of course, you can use any sort of measuring cup that you want. I also love my glass quart-size Pyrex measuring cup for a very specific purpose. And I also have just a normal, boring measuring cup for a 1/3 cup. This is what I use for my oil. With my dry ingredients, I usually kind of try to be efficient and minimize how many cups I use. And oil, I just use my measuring cup for just my oil because it messes everything up. Another tool I use is my loaf pans. I don't put this recipe in a bread maker. To me, it's not efficient. I like to be able to make 4 loaves at a time instead of just 1. So I've invested in Pampered Chef stoneware loaf pans, and I love them because they don't burn your bread or overcook them on the bottoms, and they're just really awesome. If you do have some stoneware loaf pans and you haven't seasoned them yet, I just coat it with some butter or shortening. Make sure you don't use a nonstick spray on your stoneware, and that will help the bread to not stick. But after so much time, you don't have to do that because it does get seasoned. So I have a glass loaf pan. This is kind of my second choice. I don't know what it is about glass, but I just love how my bread cooks in a glass pan. And of course, if you got a metal pan, you can use that as well. I have many, many loaf pans. And because I make bread so often, I've invested in a whole collection of stoneware loaf pans. So now, without further ado, let's go ahead and get started in the bread making itself. So I start with my quart-size measuring bowl. And I turn on my water as hot as I can make it. Now, you need warm water. Warm water is going to help activate the yeast. And I'll kind of tell you what ingredients are needed as we go, but I'll also drop the recipe in the comments after I post this. So check that out so that you can get it in paper form. So water as hot as I can get it. My first measure is going to be 4 cups of hot water. And I'm going to put this in my main bowl, my main mixing bowl. Okay, so there we go, 4 cups of water, and I'm just going to pour it into my mixing bowl here. Immediately after that, now I do that just to kind of get it out of the way, and again, to be efficient with my measuring. So then I'm going to pour 1 cup of hot water into the bottom of that measuring bowl. Okay, now this bowl is going to be used for our yeast mixture. So I keep my bulk ingredients in bulk size buckets, and I've got these screw top lids that are pretty slick, and they're like 15 bucks a pop, but worth it when I'm working with bulk as much as I am. So we're gonna put our sugar in 2 different places. The first place, we're going to put 1 tablespoon into our Pyrex mixing bowl. Okay, and we're going to mix that up so that it dissolves in the water. And the water's hot enough that it'll help that dissolve really pretty quickly. I am not using my whisk because I forgot to bring it, but usually I just use a whisk. Okay, so you stir it up until the sugar is well dissolved. The other place the sugar is going to go into is our big mixing bowl. Now, it's going to be a half cup. This is only a quarter cup, but because I already used it for sugar in another place, I'm just going to use it again. 2 quarter cups makes a half cup. So there's my sugar. I'm also going to turn on my mixer so that I can dissolve the sugar in here. Not for very long, just until it's kind of mixed up and starting to dissolve. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do, now that we have sugar dissolved in our water, we need to add the yeast. It's important to do the sugar first, because like I said, that's what gets the yeast good and happy. So you can use 4 tablespoons of yeast. To stretch my ingredients, sometimes I'll use 3, and that works just fine. But I kind of sprinkle it in my Pyrex mixing bowl, okay? And there's just kind of some beadiness. Now, I don't want to mix it up to the point where it's really well incorporated. I'm just gonna kind of dip those yeast particles into the water so that everything gets moist. And then I'm gonna set this aside and it's gonna go crazy and rise for me. While I'm waiting for that, come back to my big mixer. Now we've added the water, 4 cups of water and a half cup of sugar. And the next thing is going to be our salt. Okay, we'll just need, the recipe that I use calls for 2 tablespoons of salt. I am really hesitant to always add the full amount of salt. So I usually only just do 1, but that depends on your taste. If you prefer a saltier loaf, go ahead and go for 2. If you prefer a not so salty loaf, then just do 1. That's what I do. Okay, so I'm gonna mix that up and let the salt and the sugar continue to dissolve. And the next thing that's gonna go in is our oil. Okay, so I'm gonna bring my ginormous jug of oil and pour it in. A 1/3 cup of oil is what we're gonna add. And we're gonna put it in. Pretty simple. I'm gonna set, excuse me, set that aside. All right, now when you're working with a mixer, any sort of electric or power mixer, then you can do things in this order. If you don't have an electric mixer or any sort of power mixer, then you mix up the dry ingredients first and add the wet ingredients after. So, next thing to go in is going to be our flour. Now, one thing I love about my recipe is that you can use any kind of flour that you prefer. I love to get bread flour. Costco has a bag that is just really awesome, and I love the quality of it and the flavor. You can use all-purpose flour, and you can mix and match. You can use wheat flour as well. Now, if you do make a wheat loaf, about 1/3 of it is going to be your wheat flour. So it's partial, but most of it is going to be your white flour or your bread flour. And that just is because of the texture of the loaf. Too much wheat flour makes your loaf a bit dense and flat. So we are going to add, and this is where I take my big 4-cup mix measuring cup. All right, and I just dip it in my bucket. Isn't that handy? All right, I'm gonna put it in 4 cups in my mixture, in my mixing bowl, and then another 4 cups. Okay, so I'm gonna get that in there, and I'm going to mix it up. Now sometimes, at this point, things get a little fly away. So I put my lid on to make sure that the ingredients stay in. And I know that KitchenAid has a lid that's similar to this that just kind of helps keep our flour and everything inside. Okay, so I mix that until it's well incorporated. And it's gonna look kind of sticky about like that. Okay. Now you can see the yeast mixture has already risen. Now we're halfway up. I don't put this into the flour mixture until the yeast has risen all the way to the top. So we'll pause and come back when that is ready. All right, about 5 more minutes have passed and our yeast mixture is here and it's risen all the way to the top. So beautiful and ready to go. Okay, so I'm gonna take a rubber scraper, Pampered Chef again, and I'm going to dump this yeast mixture and all of its beautiful bubbles into the big mixing bowl. Okay, and I like to scrape the sides. If you let yeast dry, it gets pretty sticky. So I try to scrape it as much as possible and get all of that yeast in there. Okay. All right, I'm gonna set that aside. I'm gonna go ahead and mix it with my flour mixture. And I usually don't mix it too much because at this point it's pretty wet dough. But once I've got it starting to incorporate, then I'm going to add the rest of my flour. So at this point, you're going to add, if you want to make a wheat bread, then this is the point that you would add about 4 to 4.5 cups of wheat flour. Today, I'm just gonna make a white bread. So I'm going to do 4 to 4.5 more cups of white flour. Okay, I'm just gonna put it here in my bowl. Okay, and this is where things start to spill out if we don't use the lid, which we'll put on. Okay. So turn it on, let it do its work. Now, if you're working with a hand electric mixer or working with your hands, now you can turn this up pretty high and let it really work its magic. Now, as I go here, I want to knead this dough until it's kind of sticky, but not so sticky that it's sticking to the bowl, sticky so that it's sticking to itself. And actually, if we look down into the bowl, we can see it start to incorporate. Let me show you. Where it's sticking to itself and it's pulling away from the bowl. It actually kind of wipes the bowl pretty dry as it goes. And I want it to be just kind of one big mound. Don't mind me, my lid is a little bit broken. Okay? So that's kind of what we're going for, and it only takes a minute or two in an electric mixer. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn that off. If you're working with your hands, I recommend, mixing as much as you can with a spoon or a hand mixer and then kneading the rest of the flour in, and that will work totally fine. At this point, all of my ingredients are in the bowl. They've all been incorporated, and we need to let the dough rise. So as the dough rises, it tends to get a little bit sticky. So this is the point where I take my kneading hook out and I just twist it a little bit and I wipe the dough off of the hook. And like I said, it sticks really very well together, and I should be able to wipe the hook clean without too much effort. So I'm just gonna set the hook aside because, like I said, I bake in bulk and I don't stop at 4 loaves. I actually do this repeatedly and make more. Okay, so I'm gonna cover my bowl and set it aside. I have this little lid that goes on top of my lid, but you can just as easily cover your bowl with a towel or any sort of cover that's just gonna keep the warmth inside and let it rise. It should take about 20 minutes. Now, while we're waiting for that, let's prepare our loaf pans. I like to take a stick of butter that's just fresh from the refrigerator, so it's still cold. If you use butter that's too warm, this trick doesn't work as well. I do like to butter, even though my stoneware is really pretty well seasoned, I do like to butter my pans because it just kind of adds that extra buttery flavor to my loaf. So I take the tip of my stick of butter and just kind of like a paintbrush, I paint the inside and the sides of my loaf pan. And if I'm not watching what I'm doing, I make a really good mess. Anyway, now I love butter, so I'm usually pretty generous, but you can see where it's just kind of painted on there. Okay, so I'll prep my 4 loaf pans like that, and then we'll be ready to divide and get the loaves in these pans and ready to bake.